7:08 Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Welcome on in. And, you think it's cold here. Try being in Des Moines. Brian Wilson is joining us from Des Moines, Iowa. Brian, how's the weather in Des Moines?
Oh, you're loving this, aren't you, Dan Mandis? It is minus 14 degrees here, a balmy minus 14 with the wind chill factor down in the minus 20 range here in Des Moines. And, I'm telling you, it's cold. It's pretty cold.
Now, you've been speaking to Iowans there. Of course, you're there for the caucus tonight. But they're a hardy bunch. Are they used to this kind of weather? And most importantly, do you think it'll impact what happens tonight?
Well, I'm of the opinion that it might not have that much impact on what happens tonight. They're a pretty hardy bunch here in Iowa. They're not used to this kind of weather every day, but it's not unknown for them to have this kind of wind chill factor. The streets are plowed. They had a basketball game here and thousands turned out. I was at a restaurant last night and people were out and around. So I don't think it's going to stop them from going. Maybe suppress the numbers somewhat in the rural areas where maybe it's a little further to go. Maybe the roads aren't as clear as they are here in the Des Moines area. But I think by and large, there'll be a pretty good turnout for this tonight. People are engaged, and Iowans take this very seriously.
One of the things I thought was interesting, Brian, is that the headline on Drudge Report is they're thinking about maybe the possibility that Donald Trump may get a record blowout in Iowa. The headline from the Washington Post, Trump aims to break caucus records. Then they, of course, add, but Iowa sometimes surprises. We've been talking about the Des Moines Register polling that came out over the weekend, which showed that Trump went down a little bit, Haley went up a little bit, and I think DeSantis went down a little bit as well. And really what is a battle for second place. But one of the things that I thought was interesting is that half of Haley's support is independents and Democrats. And they talk about how Democrats like to become Republicans for a day sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that is really is true and how much of it is speculation. I will say that if the polls are even close to being right, it's going to be a very good night for Donald Trump. He says he wants to get to 50%, which would shatter all records. I think Bob Dole is the last one to, I think he won by 12 points. Yeah. So it'd be pretty unusual for somebody to win by 20 or more points. But, listen, Iowans sometimes surprise. They do. And sometimes the people who win in Iowa don't go on to win the nomination. That the history is replete with examples of that. So I think probably good night for Donald Trump. I think probably if I have a good beat on this, Nikki Haley comes in second, and then it's a battle for third between Vivek and Ron DeSantis. I got to sort of check in on the Vivek Ramaswamy campaign yesterday. He's got an interesting following, and he's done the full Grassley, which is to say he's visited all 99 counties in the state of Iowa, not once but twice.
Wow.
He picked up on some local issues that the others are not. So if I were to say at the end of it all, if you were to tell me Vivek did a little better than expected, I wouldn't be shocked by that. I think that the two stories are Ron DeSantis. He hasn't really gotten hold of a large voting bloc here in Iowa. He's not doing well in the New Hampshire races. On the other hand, Nikki Haley is poised to, with Christie's support, come very close to knocking Donald Trump off in New Hampshire, which is the next stop. So, I think the real story is, does she come in a decent second in Iowa, and then does she go on to New Hampshire to perhaps win? And what about DeSantis? Does he get out after Iowa? A lot of speculation is that he really can't afford to go much further, and it's just not working. And a lot of speculation that he might get out after Des Moines, and then that would bring more support potentially to Nikki Haley, and then you've got perhaps a competitive race going forward from that. So what happens in Iowa is important for who comes in second. And then I think also watch what happens to Ron DeSantis as we exit Iowa.
DeSantis, it's interesting because he was being interviewed, and I forget who it was, but, he swears that he's not going to drop out. But let me ask you, it's
well, they always say that, Dan.
I know. But it's interesting that when you talk about Iowa versus New Hampshire, so let's just say that Donald Trump does have a good night. Let's maybe say that it's a blowout. But then Haley does well in New Hampshire. So Trump wins Iowa, Haley wins New Hampshire. Which is more important? Do they cancel each other out? How does that whole thing work?
Well, it depends on then what happens to the rest of the field. Do they stay in or do they get out? I mean, that's sort of, we're at that point now where the field will probably be winnowed to some degree. Look, I think they both have their own special charm. This is, we've heard from the politicians, and we've heard from the pollsters, and we've heard from the pundits. This is the first time where the people actually have their say. Sometimes the people of Iowa surprise you. Sometimes it's quite predictable. I think a good night for Donald Trump, and then New Hampshire could be a turning point into whether or not this is going to be a competitive race or whether Donald Trump just goes on to sort of plow through all of the states up to Super Tuesday. He is hoping to actually clinch this thing by the time it gets to Tennessee's chance to vote on Super Tuesday, March 5th. So, I think we will, in Iowa, we will start the process. But by the time we come out of New Hampshire, we may have a much better idea of exactly where this all is.
Brian Wilson joining us from Des Moines, Iowa, where, Brian, you will be broadcasting your show live. Really can't wait for that. And are you going to be broadcasting from an actual caucus as it's going on or right before it starts?
Yeah, I will be. I have been given, no kidding, the keys to a church
Wow.
in Iowa. It's a big Assembly of God in nearby Urbandale. And they gave me the keys to the castle and said, set up anywhere you want to. In this particular church, it's a really big church, the New Hope Assembly of God in Urbandale. 5 different caucus meetings will be taking place in various parts of this church complex. And so I will be set up inside the church, and I'll be able to talk to people coming and going. And you have to be there. You can't be 1 minute late. You have to be in your butts and seats at 7:01 by 7 o'clock. 7:01, you can't participate. They won't let they lock the doors and nobody else comes in until it's over. And so that process will start at 7 o'clock sharp. We won't have the results because we'll end our show at 7 o'clock, and Mark Levin takes over at 7. But we will be talking to people as they come in. We went out yesterday and visited, caught up with some of the campaigns. I was with Vivek Ramaswamy, was at Nikki Haley. I was not able logistically to get to a Ron DeSantis event, but tried to get into a Donald Trump event, and an 18-year-old kid with braces and pimples prevented me from entering. They're not letting. I mean, if you're Des Moines press, you can get in. Mm-hmm. If you're the national press that travels with these candidates, you can get in. But they won't let anybody else in.
It's interesting, Brian, because before you came on, there was one of those eco-terrorist type people that went in there and started, screaming about how Donald Trump is
right.
a climate terrorist or something to that effect. How does somebody like that get in?
Well, you get a ticket if you want to attend as an attendee. You have to put in for a ticket, and they give you a paper ticket. So you can do that. I could have gone in probably that way, but I like to be up front and above board. But that's not to say that we don't have coverage from that. We have the ability to get the sound, and we'll have sound from all the candidates. You'll hear from people who came out to caucus meetings. I ran into my old friend Frank Luntz at an event yesterday, and he had some nice assessment. We'll have it all on the drive tonight starting at 3 o'clock. And I'll be checking in throughout the day with Chris Hand. Well, I guess Chris Hand's not in. Pamela Furr's in. Yep. And then also with Matt Murphy before I hit air at 3 o'clock.
This is interesting, Brian, because you're going to be in a church. And so big in the news today is something you and I spoke about on Friday, and that is the evangelicals are very supportive of Donald Trump. I also thought this was interesting. The headline from the Daily Mail, over 60% of GOP caucus goers in Iowa say they will still support Donald Trump if he's convicted of a crime before the general election. So
I think that mirrors national numbers as well. I mean, so I'm not surprised by that. I mean, he has such a loyal following, and it was a pretty festive rally yesterday with Donald Trump over in Indianola.
Yep.
There was good turnout. You go to an event with Vivek, and he pulls, there may be a couple of hundred people. I was at the Nikki Haley event last night. There's probably 400 people there. Donald Trump gets, 8, 9, 10,000. So, it's like it's a whole different arena. Look, Donald Trump is going to have a good night. He says he wants to get to 50%. Whether he reaches that threshold or not is going to be, sort of one of the storylines. Because, he said he was going to get 50%, and he came up with 48. Well, that's, to me, not a big deal. But what happens with the number 2 slot is worth watching, given the way New Hampshire seems to be setting up.
So Nikki Haley's out there. Final question here, Brian. So Nikki Haley's out there, of course, saying that she didn't run to be a number 2, and she has no interest in being Donald Trump's running mate. DeSantis, I'm certain he said the same thing. Do you have any sense about where Donald Trump is in choosing a running mate? I mean, if you're talking about, DeSantis, you've got Haley, maybe Vivek Ramaswamy, or maybe a Tim Scott. What do you think?
I don't know. I don't have a sense of it. He says he knows who it's going to be. He has attacked everybody who's running against him. Nikki Haley, I don't see as taking a number 2 because she's been pretty firm about her feelings of Donald Trump. Said last night he was the right president for the time. She has to say that. She was part of the administration.
Right.
But she says, but now, everywhere he goes comes the chaos and the crazy, and we need a new generation of leaders to come forth. So, I mean, she's really taken her swipes, and so has DeSantis. Now, that's not to say that politicians have been unknown to kiss and make up.
Yep.
But I don't see it with Nikki Haley. I don't think Ron DeSantis, and Vivek. I'm trying to figure out what his real game is here. What he's how long he will stay in, and what he hopes to accomplish. Vivek. I will say this: it's my first time to be in his personal presence. Mm-hmm. He's really good on his feet.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, he's slick. But I also listen. I look at him and I go, yeah, he's slick. But is he too slick? Is he slick in the way that a used car salesman is slick? Does he come across as that? I don't know. But I think Trump has said that he likes Vivek, mm-hmm. and wouldn't that be interesting? A Trump Vivek ticket. Trump has taken some swipes at everybody, but that's not to say they won't kiss and make up when it's all over.
Politics is strange. Well, Brian, thanks very much for joining us here on Nashville's Morning News. I know that you've got a very busy day ahead, and I cannot wait to hear your broadcast this afternoon at 3, live from Iowa, right here on Super Talk 99.7.